At 11:32 in the morning of November 29th, 1943, Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran knelt in the tail of a B-17 flying fortress named Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, the roar of German fighters slicing through the frigid air. He was only 19, a farm boy from Wisconsin, on his first combat mission over one of the most heavily defended cities in Germany. 300 bombers had been sent that morning to destroy Bremen's factories, and already 6 of them were burning in the skies. Moran's job? Protect the most vulnerable part of the aircraft, its tail. Alone, separated from the rest of the crew by over 40 feet of fuselage, Moran's only companions were 2 .50-caliber machine guns and a storm of Luftwaffe fighters. His fingers itched with both fear and adrenaline as he scanned the sky, memorizing the silhouettes of Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf 190. Training had taught him to track fast-moving targets, fire in short bursts, and conserve ammunition. But nothing could have prepared him for this. At 24,000 feet, the temperature dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the thin air made every movement an effort. Each German attack felt like it carried the weight of death itself. The bomber formation moved in tight defensive boxes, a calculated ballet meant to overwhelm enemy pilots with overlapping firepower. But reality was unforgiving. A single hit on one plane could tear through the wing of another. Black bursts of flak erupted from Bremen's anti-aircraft guns as Rikki-Tikki-Tavi released its bombs, 4,000 pounds of explosives tumbling toward the factories below. The mission was a success. Now survival depended on returning home. Then it happened. The bomber's No. 2 engine took a direct hit. Propeller windmilled uselessly. Speed dropped. Behind a wall of metal, Moran could see German fighters already closing in on the straggler. A dozen Messerschmitts climbed from below. Focke-Wulfs dove from above. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi was alone. Moran's heart pounded. The tailgunner's position was designed for defense, but in that moment, it felt like a coffin. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky as Moran fired. Each pull of the trigger sent a shiver through his arms that were soon grazed by enemy fire. Blood soaked his flight suit sleeves, yet he continued. Focke-Wulfs came in pairs. One drew his fire while the other lined up a killing shot. He swung his guns, twisted in the narrow compartment, keeping the attackers at bay. He had no choice. He could not die. Not here. Not yet. Suddenly, a cannon shell tore through the tail section. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi shuddered violently. Moran felt the airframe twist, a sound that would haunt him forever. The scream of tearing aluminum. The fuselage split forward of his position. The front of the aircraft, the cockpit, his crewmates, all plummeting toward the German countryside. Alone, in the severed tail section, Moran faced 40,000 feet of sky. His parachute, shredded by cannon fire, offered no chance of survival. Yet he did not surrender to fear. The spinning tail section became a deadly arena. German fighters circled, curious and confident. But Moran, bleeding and wounded, continued firing. His bullets struck one of the Messerschmitts, sending it spiraling downward in black smoke. His first confirmed kill, and no time to celebrate. Every second mattered. Every shot was survival. For anyone watching, this is where you need to witness the impossible. Imagine falling 4 miles, trapped in a broken aircraft, arms shattered, parachute useless, and still fighting. Hit the like button if you want to see more incredible stories of survival, and subscribe if you haven't yet, because this is just the beginning of Eugene Moran's journey, a journey that will redefine what it means to survive against all odds. The tail section's aerodynamics slowed its fall. The stabilizers acted like crude wings, turning a free fall into a twisted glide. Fields, forests, and roads rushed up. Moran braced himself against the steel chest plate, still gripping ammunition boxes. The ground came closer. 5,000 feet, 3,000, 1,000, and still, he fired. Survival was no longer luck. It was will. The shattered tail section of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi spun violently through the German sky, 40,000 feet above enemy territory. Eugene Moran's arms were shredded, his flight suit soaked in blood, yet he refused to surrender. He gripped the twin .50 caliber machine guns as tightly as he could, twisting with the tail section's unpredictable rotations. German fighters circled, confident that their target was already dead. Moran's bullets streaked through the air, a desperate defense against certain death. Every pass by the enemy fighters brought fresh terror. One Focke-Wulf swooped low, attempting to tear the tail apart. Moran's trembling fingers squeezed the triggers. Tracer rounds ripped through the air, striking the fighter and sending it spiraling into black smoke. The tail section's crude aerodynamic drag slowed its fall enough to give him a chance. Fields and forests rushed toward him, indistinct shapes of the German countryside blurred by speed and terror. Every second felt like an hour. He remembered the training he had received back in Wisconsin. Short bursts, controlled fire, conserve ammunition. It was all theory now, tested in the most extreme conditions imaginable. The theory barely mattered. Instinct and sheer will carried him forward. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi shuddered again as another shell ripped through the fuselage. Moran felt the vibrations in his broken arms, pain lancing through his body with every motion. His parachute was useless, shredded by cannon fire. The concept of escape had vanished. Survival meant fighting in the impossible. A Messerschmitt approached from below. Moran swung his guns, tracking the plane through the spinning tail. He fired, and the fighter's wing tore apart, smoke trailing behind it as it fell into the forests below. His first confirmed kill from the tail of a falling aircraft. But there was no time to celebrate. The German sky was alive with threats. Each enemy attack reminded him how fragile his life had become. Every hit could end everything. Yet even in pain and exhaustion, he remained a fighting force. The tail of the plane became a deadly arena, a small, spinning coffin in which he refused to die. The front of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi had completely separated from the tail. He could see glimpses of the wreckage tumbling away, cockpit, engines, crewmates, vanishing toward the ground. 40,000 feet of open air surrounded him. Alone. Moran's hands, mangled and bloodied, still worked. He swung the guns, kept German fighters at bay, and maintained an impossible focus. His breathing was ragged, his body screaming with pain. Each moment was measured in survival, each trigger squeeze a battle against death. The ground below grew larger, 5,000 feet, 3,000, 1,000, and still he fired. The spinning tail began to stabilize slightly, the vertical and horizontal surfaces acting like crude wings, slowing the fall. Every second gained was precious. He braced against the steel chest plate, holding ammunition boxes like lifelines. Trees approached rapidly. Fields and farmhouses blurred past. In a surreal mix of terror and determination, Moran continued his defense. Every shot he fired mattered. Every second counted. The German fighters were unnerved, confused by a tail gunner still shooting from a dying aircraft. In that chaos, Moran found control in the only way he could, by refusing to surrender. It was no longer luck keeping him alive. It was sheer will, a mental battle fought against the physics of falling metal, the cold of 24,000 feet, and the deadly precision of trained Luftwaffe pilots. Moran's focus narrowed. There was only him, his guns, and the spinning tail. The impossible became real. Survival was not guaranteed, but he would not yield. Every movement, every pull of the trigger, was an act of defiance against death itself. The tail of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi continued to glide downward, slower than free fall, twisting through the air like a metal shrapnel tornado. Moran's eyes scanned constantly, arms shaking, body screaming, refusing to give in. In those moments, Eugene Moran embodied the absolute extremity of human endurance. A 19-year-old farm boy fighting death in the sky, in a machine torn apart around him, refusing to stop until the ground would finally decide his fate. The morning sun rose pale and cold over the snow-covered fields of Germany. Eugene Moran's body ached with every breath. His arms were still in splints, the metal plate in his skull a constant reminder of how close he had come to death. The crash, the tail sections spinning, the impossible fight in the air, all of it felt like a nightmare that had stretched on for months. And yet, here he was, alive, shivering, and surrounded by the ruins of a war-torn countryside. He had survived something that would have killed almost anyone else. But survival, he quickly realized, was only the beginning. The German guards herded him and hundreds of other prisoners onto frozen trucks. The roads were treacherous, coated with ice, and the prisoners were packed shoulder to shoulder. Many could barely stand, their bodies weakened by months of starvation and disease. Moran's ribs protested every jolt of the vehicle. His broken arm swung uselessly at his sides. The cold seeped into his bones. Still, he focused on one thought: keep moving. Do not stop. Stopping meant death. The trucks delivered them to a new camp, one even farther east. Moran stepped onto the frozen ground and immediately felt the strain of months of captivity. Barbed wire fences stretched endlessly in every direction. Guard towers loomed overhead. Machine guns trained on the prisoners. The compound was filled with men who had been there for years, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They looked at Moran with a mixture of disbelief and respect. Few had survived what he had endured. Fewer still had survived the crash, the infection, and the brutal transport to this camp. Life in the camp was relentless. The barracks were wooden, drafty, and provided little protection against the bitter Eastern European winter. Snow seeped through the gaps in the walls. Food was scarce: thin soup, black bread, occasionally a potato. Red Cross parcels arrived sporadically, often too few to sustain everyone. Moran's body was still healing, but he had learned to ration his strength. Every movement was calculated. Every effort was measured. He shared his rations with weaker men, earning their quiet admiration. They called him the tail gunner who could not die. Weeks turned into months. Moran's arms gradually regained some strength, though they would never be fully normal. The headaches from the skull plate were constant, a throbbing reminder of his fragility. But he pushed on. He worked alongside fellow prisoners to maintain order in the camp, help with small repairs, and even teach younger airmen rudimentary gunnery tactics. He refused to let the war break his spirit. Inside, he vowed that he would not simply survive. He would endure, and he would remember. By the summer of 1944, the war had shifted dramatically. Soviet forces advanced from the east. Allied armies pressed from the west. The Germans, desperate to prevent liberation of the POWs, decided to move the prisoners deeper into territory still under their control. Moran and hundreds of others were forced onto trains, then marched across frozen roads in what would become known as the Black March. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Men with no winter coats, no gloves, and broken bodies trudged through snow and ice. Each step was agony. Each breath was a test of will. Many fell and never rose again. Moran's broken arms ached with every step. His ribs, though partially healed, screamed with pain as he pressed onward. The metal plate in his skull conducted the cold directly into his brain, a constant stabbing reminder of his past trauma. Yet he walked, step by step, day by day. He encouraged those around him, sharing warmth, food, and a grim determination. His presence was a small beacon of hope in a world that had been stripped of humanity. The Black March lasted for 86 days. The prisoners slept in barns filled with manure, or on frozen ground with nothing but the snow for insulation. They drank from streams and melted snow, often contaminated. Dysentery, frostbite, typhus, and pneumonia were constant threats. Guards shot anyone who fell behind. Moran had survived 4 miles of freefall from the sky without a parachute, and now he survived the slow, torturous grind of the march. Each step was an act of defiance against fate itself. During the march, Moran relied on every bit of his mental and physical training. He memorized the landscape, helped weaker men navigate, and used knowledge from his farm life to find food where possible. He created small routines to maintain a sense of control, checking his equipment, stretching, and sharing stories of home. The mind, he realized, could sustain the body in ways nothing else could. He clung to memories of Wisconsin, of the fields, the smell of hay, the comfort of home. These memories became lifelines, mental anchors that prevented despair from consuming him. As they crossed villages and towns, locals occasionally risked small acts of kindness, a loaf of bread, a warm coat, or a whispered encouragement. Moran absorbed these gestures quietly, knowing that any sign of weakness could be deadly under the watchful eyes of the guards. He became adept at reading the mood of the soldiers, predicting their patience, and pacing his movements accordingly. He observed, learned, and adapted, skills that had kept him alive in the tale of Rikki-Tikki-Tavi months earlier. Finally, in early 1945, the front lines began to close in. Soviet artillery roared in the distance. German soldiers, already exhausted and fearful, tightened their control, but were themselves shaken by the advancing Allies. Moran and the remaining prisoners sensed change in the air. There was talk of surrender, of retreat, of liberation. But until that moment came, every step forward was a fight, every day a challenge against the limits of human endurance. Moran's body was weak, his wounds partially healed, but his mind remained unbroken. Survival had become habit, a reflex, a refusal to accept death on terms dictated by others. By February of 1945, after months of captivity and nearly 3,000 miles of combined forced marches, Eugene Moran saw the first signs of freedom. Allied forces were advancing rapidly. German control was slipping. The prisoners, thin, frostbitten, and exhausted, could sense the approaching end of the war. Moran's will had carried him from the tail of a falling aircraft, through infection, surgery, months in POW camps, and 86 days of brutal forced marches. Against every possible odds, he was still alive. And now, at long last, he glimpsed the faint promise of liberation. When the gates finally opened, Allied soldiers greeted the survivors. Moran, battered, weak, and scarred by months of unimaginable trials, stepped forward. Each breath of fresh air was a victory, each sight of blue sky a miracle. He had survived the impossible, a 4-mile fall from a crippled bomber, near fatal injuries, and months of torment behind enemy lines. Eugene Moran had not just survived, he had endured, inspired, and witnessed the sheer limits of human resilience. And as he walked toward freedom, he carried the memory of every crewmate lost, every challenge faced, and every second he had refused to surrender to fear. His story would endure as a testament to courage, survival, and the unbreakable will of a single farm boy from Wisconsin who defied death, time and war itself.